It's a chilly November morning in my small apartment on the outskirts of Minneapolis, with a chill that seeps into every corner. With a warm cup of tea in one hand and an old magazine I bought from the thrift store down the street. In the other, I'm leaning back in my shabby chair. The air is crisp and thin, yet oddly serene. Everything is strangely silent as the bleak sky outside looms over the earth, seemingly ready to shower snow. Yet it holds back. My phone calls break the silence like a sudden storm. My father's name flashes on the screen when I look at it. Even though I have a tight knot in my chest, I press the speaker button without holding out hope for a positive outcome. His voice seems light, as if he's telling me about a straightforward errand rather than something that may blow everything up. "Emily, you don't need to come home for Thanksgiving this year." He says. I hesitate for a while, wondering whether I heard him wrong. I say, "I'm sorry, what?" in a voice that sounds strange even to me. He goes on, "We just think it's better if you stayed put," without skipping a beat, as if he were reading aloud from a mental screenplay. "Mandy's been a bit on edge lately, you know." I place the teacup on the table and let it clink against the saucer. It's a startling sound, dry and harsh. "Mandy?" I ask again, a lump in my throat growing as my voice catches. My younger sister Mandy has always been considered the frail princess and has never been held responsible for anything. To keep her comfortable, the family suppresses their breath as if they were treading carefully. Despite the mounting strain in my chest, I manage to remain composed and remark sharply, "So what you're saying is, I'm not invited because Mandy gets tense." On the other end, I can hear my dad's recognizable sigh, the one he usually lets out when he wants me to stop talking and not cause a commotion. "It's not personal, Emily." He continues, his tone tightening. "It's just one day. You'll be fine." I can sense the rage building and about to explode. Is it just a single day? He says that as if it were inconsequential. He speaks as if it were insignificant. But for so long, I've given so much. The ancient chair creaks beneath me as I push back and get to my feet. "Just one day?" I ask again, struggling to keep my composure. "You say that after I've sent over $400 to $800 this year alone, just to keep the furnace running through the winter." Quiet. There was complete silence, except for the slight hum of the phone line that stretched across the space between us. Even though he seems a little agitated when he says, "Don't bring money into this," his tone remains severe. "You offered to help." My hollow chuckle reverberates around the deserted room. "Offered in January, when the heating bill spiked. You called me at midnight saying the house was freezing. Who paid it? Me. In March, when Mom cried because the furnace was clanking. Who called the repairman? Me. And in September, when Mandy blew through her savings on her podcast plan, who paid for the fall heating oil?" I pause, my voice shaking but controlled. "Still me." He doesn't reply, instead, relying on his well-worn catchphrase, "Family is family." "Emily." As I gaze out the window, I see the first snowflakes blanket the sidewalk with a gentle, silent fall. My chest gets constricted. I've experienced a lot. The person who needs peace, however, is Mandy, as she always manages to avoid consequences. Once more, Dad's voice tries to sound steady, but frustration is beginning to show. "Don't make this awkward. It's not personal, Emily." With my fingers holding the table's edge, as if it were the only thing keeping me rooted, I take a long breath and try to stabilize myself. I add in a chilly, decisive tone. "Then don't expect another dime from me this winter if I'm not considered part of the family." Before he can answer, I end the call. My thoughts darken along with my phone's screen. I feel aloof and numb. The snow is still falling outside, but it isn't any quieter than the current quietness in the room. With my hands gripped tightly together, as though to keep everything in place, I collapse back into the bed. The call and the words replay in my mind like a broken record. They succeeded. They actually succeeded. As if I were nothing. They didn't invite me to Thanksgiving. This felt similar to calling off a visit to the dentist. I glance at the little picture, a 2008 Thanksgiving picture on the shelf. It was a picture of Mandy, my dad, and myself. I had just started my first job at the shipping firm. I took the bus home despite the long hours and little salary simply to sit at the table, eat Mom's roast chicken, and hear Dad babble on about his sports team. Now that warmth seems like a dusty, faraway memory. I rise, make my way to my desk, and turn on my laptop. Cold and biting the wind howls outside and slips through the ancient window frame. I open the utility payment account which I created last winter when Mom wailed over the phone because they couldn't afford heating oil because it was too cold. It was me who paid all of the bills and made the monthly calls to the oil company, $2,400 plus last year. This year, it cost more than $4,800 simply to keep them warm. I used to believe that there were no conditions or concerns when it came to aiding relatives. Now, though, I now see that until I was making the sacrifice, assisting them never mattered. I opened the Excel document in which I discreetly recorded each transfer. The most recent entry indicates that I delivered $400 before the cold 10 months ago. Thanksgiving is a little more than 1 month away. Do they even recall, I wonder, I watched, as my sister Mandy spent over $16,000 of my parents' savings on her failing business endeavor, mass-produced artisanal candles created in Texas and labeled as handmade that sold for 3 times the price but were never purchased. The garage was overflowing with merchandise, and my parents dismissed it without holding her responsible. They said, "She's young, everyone makes mistakes." I said nothing whatsoever. I just provided them additional funds in secret to get them through the winter. Mandy, meanwhile, shared photos on Instagram of the newest Zara Coat brunches with pals and $7 lattes at retro cafes. With my hand hurting from a 10-hour job at the loading dock, I watched it through the entire screen. I considered texting her to find out how she could be so unaware, but I decided that I might not need to, and that I would never really comprehend her. I hover my finger over the cancel service button as I sit there. It only takes a single click to complete. The payments will cease. I pause for a long time, not because I'm unsure, but because I am allowing myself to reminisce about what it was like to matter to them. Then I make a click. A notice appears. November 2nd is the last day of service. 4 weeks prior to Thanksgiving, I go to the window after shutting down the laptop. The silent blanket of snow that covers everything outside is getting heavier now. It falls all around me like my father's words, weightless and light. However, snow may freeze an entire house if it falls for a long enough period of time. Not immediately, but they will notice. While preparing supper, Mom will attempt to ignore it until her fingers get numb. Mandy will continue to believe that everything revolves around her and Dad. He'll get mad, but he can't deny that he told me to stay put. I feel empty inside, like I've just let go of something significant. The part of me that woke up the 3rd time I had to decide between sending money home or buying a new coat, however, feels lighter. I no longer make sacrifices for myself. In the cold, I'll see them. When they are no longer in need of you, they will experience what it is like to be disregarded. And I'm speaking out for myself for the first time in a long time. After that phone call, the days get hazy. The harsh, unrelenting, and unforgiving storm outside of Minneapolis begins to resemble my existence. My tiny, peaceful flat turns into a haven for me. Outside my window, the wind howls, but inside it's warm quiet. And mine, this existence seemed like mine for the first time, after I had constructed it piece by piece, and shift after shift. For once, I found solace in the knowledge that I wasn't the victim of someone else's turmoil. I no longer had to pretend or make compromises. For the first several days after I stopped the heating oil service, my phone buzzes incessantly. I choose not to take it up. I don't answer Mandy's pleas for money. My mother's anxious tone and my father's voice all follow the same pattern. However, their words are no longer important. It matters that I'm not the one rushing to make everyone comfortable, now that they've left me out in the cold for so long. I'm drinking coffee one morning when the text messages resume. The heating system isn't working properly. Emily, could you please check it? I put my phone face down on the table. After taking a brief look at it, I don't respond. I don't have to. Their communication's urgency doesn't alter the fact that I'm done. Not that I don't give a damn. Yes, I do. I stopped allowing people to take advantage of me because I care too much. However, they always defined family in a conditional sense. And when the other side never gave back, I've slowly and painfully come to realize that it's acceptable to cease giving. There will be additional messages and requests over the following few days. Dad calls again, sounding more frantic. The home is frigid. Emily, the temperature inside is 58 degrees. If you have any information, please give me a call. I let it ring. His voice keeps repeating in my head, like a reminder of all the times I've been the one keeping everything together. I've been bearing the burden of their comfort, while he's been aloof and chilly. However, now that I've stopped, now that I've declined to assist, they're beginning to recognize the fragility of their universe. The heating oil supplier calls me on the 6th day. For the past 2 winters, I've been coping with the same one. Hello, is Miss Emily here? Regarding extending the service for the residents at 422 Elm Street, we have not received a response. Do you intend to keep making payments? I respond in a steady, almost too calm voice. No. We terminated the agreement and will not extend it. That residence is no longer my responsibility. On the other end, the man pauses. Just to be sure you don't plan to keep making payments. That's correct, I respond, releasing the words from my mouth like a weight lifted. I sat quietly for a while, the constant hum of my tiny space heater filling the room. It feels like home in the flat. My house. Once more the phone buzzes. This time it's a message from Mandy. One phrase accusing and frigid. All right, act like you were never a member of this family. I move my cursor over it. No response. I don't need to elaborate. There's no need to apologize. The snowfall strikes on the 10th day. The snowfall muffles noise, enveloping everything in a blanket of white, thereby hiding the world. I'm snug inside, warm and secure. In the corner, the heater hums. I feel the calm seeping into my bones when I take a drink of my tea. I haven't felt truly at ease in weeks. Then, however, calls begin to come in once more. My phone floods with messages from Dad, Mom, and Mandy. The messages all have the same tone of desperation. There is a consistent feeling of urgency. However, now that it's not my responsibility, things are different. At first, it's difficult to avoid feeling guilty. I had always been the one to make things right and put things right. However, I'm coming to see that sometimes taking a step back is necessary to solve anything. When no one else is willing to help, it means that I need to set the boundary. On November 17th, Dad texts me once again. The temperature in the home is 54 degrees. Emily, Mandy has been coughing all day, and your dad won't put on a coat. Would you please help? I put my phone down, read it, and turned to go. I'm no longer their fallback. I cook grilled cheese sandwiches that evening. The room is filled with the aroma of sizzling butter. Although it's cold outside, it's warm inside. I take a seat at the table and eat quietly. I don't need to check my phone, although it does occasionally vibrate. Breaking the silence, I no longer have to justify myself. Dad makes another call on the 19th. 12 times I don't answer. The communications arrive more quickly and frantically. I don't have to listen to them. I understand their words. I am well versed in the story. However, it is no longer my story. Mandy makes another social media post. I click past a picture of her feet, wearing thick socks with the description, "Cold enough to feel like we live in a freezer." She displays neither anger nor frustration. They simply nod silently. The freezer they made for themselves is where they currently reside. I receive another communication from Dad on November 21st. The temperature in the home has dropped to 40 degrees. Emily. Your dad is wearing a winter coat while he sleeps. I can't even clean the dishes since my hands are so numb. Are you able to assist? I'm preparing supper. The air is heavy with the smell of soup. I put my phone down, read the message, and went back to cooking. I decided to stop making excuses. There will be no more obligations. On the 23rd, the day before Thanksgiving, I receive a message from Dad that completely silences me. This is your chance to prove that you are still a member of this family. I freeze the knife in my hand and pause in the middle of slicing. Although my father's remarks still hurt, they do not affect me as much as they used to. I don't feel bad about it this time. I am not the one who is shivering this time. I consider the ancient house that I grew up in, and it is currently up for sale. I reflect on all the years I've spent attempting to please them, to improve things, to establish my value. However, I no longer require their approval. I no longer require their affection to feel deserving. Staring out at the snow falling, I stood by the window. My childhood home is chilly, though it doesn't make me pleased to think about it. I also don't feel awful about it. It's time they realized how much it costs to ignore someone. The phone rings once again. I don't respond. There was an uncanny silence in the days after Thanksgiving. It's the type of quietness that makes you think that everything is holding its breath, waiting for anything to disturb it, but I wasn't holding my breath for the first time in months. They were the ones. They were learning what it was like to be on the other side, even if they didn't know it. This was the side that refused to accept their demands without question. It was the side where they were waiting. I didn't respond, but my phone kept buzzing. Every text from Mandy and every call from Dad had the same tone, accusation, guilt, and haste. However, I wasn't responsible for fixing it this time. They wanted me to return to save them again, to intervene like I always had. I had no intention of doing it. I was drinking coffee at my kitchen table when I first heard from Haley, after the deluge of texts had subsided. She was the only family member who never asked for anything, or treated me like a faceless bank account. The sound of the wind howling outside her window in southern Minnesota blended with the lightness of her voice. She jumped right in and said, "Emily, I just spoke to Aunt Claire. It's worse than I anticipated. There was a slight pain in my chest." "What are you saying?" Haley went on. "Mandy moved out. She recently ended her relationship with her new beau. Although they only allowed her to remain for a few days, she is currently staying at her best friend's house. She is currently dozing off on a couch in Eden Prairie." It was difficult not to have a glimmer of something, whether empathy or simply a depressing acceptance of the outcome. Everything had always been given to Mandy, who was able to get by with no accountability, and now she was receiving nothing from the world, just as she had given nothing to everyone else. "How about my parents?" I questioned, attempting to speak steadily, although something inside of me had cracked again. Haley sighed after hesitating. "Aunt Claire is lodging at a budget hotel close to Highway 52. Your dad has pneumonia, and she has it too. To pay for some temporary heating oil that would only last a few days. He sold his grandfather's antique watch collection." Feeling the heat emanate from the porcelain, as though it might warm the cold space in my chest, I tightened my hold on the teacup grandfather's timepieces, the one item he had forgotten. "It is now sold to pay for the same individuals who didn't care and didn't see me." Haley's voice grew softer, as if she could detect my quiet. "How are you, Emily?" Gazing at the steam rising from my cup, I inhaled slowly. I didn't know whether I was lying to myself or to her when I said, "I'm okay. I'm a little depressed about how everything ended." Haley's answer was incisive and strong. "I believe you made the correct decision. It's not family if people only turn to you when they're in need. That is taking advantage of you." I took a while to respond. Her words kept coming back to me, repeating themselves. Although I wasn't the first person to notice this, it felt like the first time I truly understood it. I wasn't a bank. I wasn't a backup for anyone. I was a human being with needs, boundaries, and a life worth living. We spoke for a little while more before hanging up, but the old burden of guilt had left me. For the first time in years, I felt light and liberated. Not much changed in the next few weeks. Life continued in the cadence I had established for myself. I enjoyed my coffee in the mornings, worked shifts at the distribution center, visited the local market in the afternoons, spent my evenings reading books and listening to music, and occasionally received a call from Haley. It was my life, basic as it was. More important than anything else was that I wasn't rushing to satisfy other people's demands. Then one day, Mandy sent me a message. As usual, the tone was sweet and syrupy, and it was a plea and a demand. "Can you assist me, Emily? I'm stuck to make it through the month. I need $200. I kept my fingertips hovering over the screen while I gazed at the message for a while. Knowing that she would never appreciate my quiet assistance and would always find a way to waste it on pointless things made me feel the weight of every dollar I had provided her. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. A few days later, Mandy shared a story on social media showing her feet in thick socks and writing "cold enough to feel like we live in a freezer." I laughed quietly, but without resentment, no rage. There was only silent consent. It was no longer my responsibility to save her. She was living in the freezer she had built for herself. 2 days before Thanksgiving, on November 23rd, I received another note from Dad. This one was unique. Money wasn't the only factor. "This is your chance to prove that you are still a member of this family. Emily." I placed the telephone on the table. The weight of the question caused my palms to tremble a little. Not because I was angry. They were asking for more from me. Even after I had already done everything I could for them, I once again prioritized their needs over my own. I assumed the role of the one who resolved issues and ensured everyone's comfort, a role I had been embodying for years. The house I grew up in, the one that was up for sale, was on my mind. Even when I had nothing left to offer, I remembered all the times I had made sacrifices and set aside my needs to ensure others got what they needed. Then, for the first time, I understood that I was no longer accountable to them. I didn't have to continue to provide. There was nothing for me to prove. I watched the snow fall outside as I stood at the window. I was warm on the inside, even if the outside was freezing. At last I felt warm. It seemed almost unbelievable how calm the days after Thanksgiving were. It's challenging to fill this stillness as it encompasses both physical and emotional aspects. I wasn't always waiting for my family to contact me, phone me, or need me for the first time in years. They had learned that I would consistently provide and be present even if it required self-sacrifice. Without a doubt, I had consistently taken the brunt of all the responsibilities. Now, though I was no longer running to solve anything, I made a choice that I knew would change everything. I was unable to return to being the person who simply bore their suffering. I had changed from that person. It wasn't simple, though. Every morning when I woke up, a heavy quiet weighed on my chest. A part of me questioned if I had made the correct decision. But I didn't feel bad. How would my relatives feel? Would they realize their mistake? Would they see me as the one who abandoned them when they needed me most? Or would they understand? Though they still lurked in the back of my mind, those questions no longer held the same influence over me. It was time to give back to myself, since I had already given enough of myself to those folks. The cold crept in as December went on, but it was still comfortable in my tiny flat. I found comfort not only in the coffee and the space heater, but also in the peaceful atmosphere I had created for myself. In the evenings, I read baked, took long walks in the snow, and occasionally just sat by the window, watching the world freeze outside. It was oddly comforting to know that no one was relying on me to fix their problems, and that I was no longer responsible for the world. My phone buzzed one day as the snow started to fall more heavily. It came from Dad. I gazed at the television as the same feeling of fear returned like an unshakable shadow. We really need to talk, Emily. Would you be able to visit? We don't have heat and your mom has been ill. I'm unsure of what to do and it's freezing, Mandy's. She's not helpful though, and your mother? She's struggling. Please. I briefly closed my eyes as I absorbed the significance of what he had spoken. He never sought assistance until it was too late, and the fallout from their deeds had accumulated to a point where no one could ignore it. It was the same old tale. However, it didn't hurt as much as it used to. I no longer felt accountable for their issues. The old version of myself, who would have given anything to help and always agreed to assist, tried to persevere, but I didn't back down. I had no intention of fixing the situation for them. They had to deal with the fallout from their decisions just as I had to. I didn't respond to his message. Rather, I continued with my day, enjoying my coffee, while listening to the sound of the snow pattering against the windowsill. Any shame they attempted to impose on me was far less precious than the tranquility in my flat. I received a call from Mandy that night. She didn't even try to say hello. "Emily, I need help," she began in a monotone voice, as if she were reciting a prepared screenplay. "The home is chilly, Dad is ill, and Mom is ill. Will you understand? I'm not able to accomplish this mission alone. Please, send me something. Please, anything." I gazed at the phone as the old familiar sensation returned. Her voice was already filled with urgency and the anticipation that I would deliver as I usually did. However, I didn't feel terrible for her this time. This time I simply sensed finished. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. She could have conveyed more words, but the stillness that followed her message felt louder. I was no longer her fallback. Nobody used me as a backup. Once they made mistakes in their own lives, I ceased to be the one to save them, and letting go was the most difficult thing. It was the greatest part, though. The days that followed were a haze of chilly temperatures, subdued city sounds, and peaceful times spent alone. I wasn't looking for their approval or waiting for them to realize their mistake. Living for myself was something I was learning. Dad sent me another mail on the 10th of December. This one was more straightforward and distinctive. "Please, Emily, money isn't the issue here. It has to do with family. I need your assistance. Mandy has been a complete mess, and your mother. She is becoming worse. Please." I spent a lot of time looking at the message. Although I could still feel the same guilt pulling at me. My situation had changed. I had reached my limit. That was more than enough for me. I refused to fall back into their trap. I didn't respond. I awoke the following morning to the steady, gentle sound of snow falling. After putting on my thickest sweater, I went to the window to see how the outside world transformed into a wintry paradise. It was hushed and serene. At that moment, I understood that I could feel good about myself without solving their issues. I didn't have to bear the weight of everyone else's problems. I had done it for so long, but no one had ever appreciated it. But I was free now. I was enjoying a hot cup of tea that night when I heard someone knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was late. Dad was standing in the cold, his breath apparent in the icy air, when I approached the door and peered through the peephole. Feeling a range of emotions that I couldn't quite pinpoint, I slightly opened the door. His voice was more frigid than the wintry night outside when he whispered, "Emily," quietly, "we must speak." For a time, I remained motionless, considering my alternatives. In reality, however, I no longer needed to say anything. When I turned to go, I had said everything I had to. "I apologize, Dad," I continued steadily, "but I don't think it's appropriate to talk today." He gazed at me, looking for something in my eyes that might allow him to re-enter. However, I was no longer that person. Although I was unwilling to allow him to re-enter my life, I had left the door open. He could feel the cold he had made for himself because it was open. I whispered softly, "I'm not going to keep saving you, Dad, and I'm not coming back." His shoulders drooped as he remained there for a long moment, Then he turned and strode back into the darkness. The sound of the lock clicking into position reverberated in my head as I shut the door. I didn't feel any lighter. I didn't experience a wave of relief. However, I did have a sense of serenity that I hadn't had in years. The scene outside my flat became a silent white haze as the snow kept falling thick and gentle. I had made the choice, and now that I was sitting in the tranquility, I had worked so hard to establish I could finally breathe without having to worry about what other people thought of me. Even with the freedom I had gained, there were still times when memories of the past resurfaced, suggesting that I should have been more patient and understanding, or that I hadn't done enough. However, those ideas were short-lived. They were the remnants of a life I had left behind. 2 weeks had passed since I had shut my family out. Ever since I had been accustomed to a routine that seemed more like breathing than actual life I had grown accustomed to. The early mornings, the cozy light of my tiny kitchen, and the soothing sound of the heater beneath my feet. Working 7 to 3 shifts at the distribution center had been consistent. It was the type of work that let me shut off my mind for a few hours and concentrate solely on the task at hand. When I wasn't working, I read or explored the city, looking for new locations to live, dine, and drink. I was gradually creating an area that was exclusively for myself. However, my phone buzzed with a fresh message one morning as the outside world was beginning to awaken. I opened it, even though I didn't recognize the number, because I knew in my heart who it was from, before I even glanced at the screen. "It's your mother, Emily. I am aware that things have been difficult. I just wanted to apologize. I have no expectations of you. However, I do want you to know that I've been considering all of this. I ought to have supported you. I hope everything is well with you." The words hit me hard, not in the way I had expected. There was only a subdued kind of tiredness, no overpowering surge of remorse or wrath. I had been the one keeping things together for so long, buckling under the strain of my family's issues. However, considering everything that had happened, my mother's message and this meager attempt at reconciliation merely reminded me of what I had discovered. I didn't require their well-being. I didn't have to improve them. For years, I had been trying to rectify flaws in a foundation that never meant to sustain me. I could finally enjoy my life without having to put out the flames they caused. All the time, I didn't immediately respond to her message. Rather, I put my phone away and closed it. I wasn't going to let the past drag me back into what I had created for myself. Not now. Haley phoned again a few days later. Her voice light, but carrying that familiar tone of worry that only she could control. "I just wanted to check in, Emily. I know I just heard something, even though I know the family has been quiet lately. Mandy has returned to the city." The warmth of the coffee seeped into my palms as I leaned against the kitchen counter and traced the rim of my mug with my fingertips. I wasn't shocked. When everything fell apart around her, Mandy always managed to show up. Haley went on. "She's been posting on social media about needing help again, but she's crashing with some friends. You know, she's still acting like the victim. She acts as though she hasn't acquired any understanding." I let out a sigh as I peered out the window at the streets blanketed in a gentle white blanket after the snow had stopped falling. "Haley, I understand. I've witnessed it. I'm finished. I've given up attempting to get them to notice me. They won't alter. Furthermore, I can't wait for the changes to happen." I no longer felt furious. I would have experienced remorse, annoyance, or perhaps a tiny glimmer of optimism that things would be different at one point. Now, however, there was only a silent resolution, an acceptance I had reconciled with the past, and it was sufficient. The weeks that followed were a haze of loneliness and cold. I didn't see how my family was doing. I didn't check their posts on social media. I didn't have to. I had mastered the art of surviving without their allure, and I felt like I was finally breathing for the first time in a long time. Then I got another communication, this time from Dad, right before New Year's. It was brief, direct, and more powerful than I had anticipated. We've gone through a lot together, Emily, and I can see why you've distanced yourself. I truly have no idea how to improve our situation. However, I would like to try. I want you to rejoin this family. The words hurt, but not as much as they used to. I thought back on everything that had happened, the years I had spent fighting for attention and recognition, and the constant disregard I had received. They wanted me back now that everything was falling apart around them. The quiet of my flat surrounded me as I gazed at the letter I had put forth. A lot of effort to reach this moment, to finally let go of the expectations and the guilt. However, at this moment, the choice is more difficult than I had anticipated. I didn't respond right away. Instead, the message weighed heavily on my mind as I pondered over it. For a long time, I had given up everything for them and handled their issues as if my own were not important. Now, though, I was living my life for myself now, and it was all that was important. After setting my phone aside, I returned to the kitchen and made myself another cup of tea. I grinned to myself as the warmth moved through me. I didn't require their blessing. It was no longer necessary for me to make the repairs. I had mastered the art of independence and self-reliance, and it was sufficient.